In the golden heart of ancient Egypt, where the sun painted the desert in shades of amber and gold, a young girl named Nefertiti lived near the banks of the Nile River. The world around her shimmered, tall palm trees waved in the warm breeze, and the sound of the flowing river carried stories of gods and kings. Nefertiti loved to watch the boats glide across the water, their sails glowing white in the sunlight. She often dreamed of adventure beyond the city's stone walls, where mysteries of temples and pyramids awaited. Though she was not born royal, there was something special in the way she carried herself, proud, curious, and unafraid. Her father served as a high advisor to the pharaoh's court. Because of this, Nefertiti often visited the royal palace at Thebes. There, she would walk through grand halls filled with pillars carved with ancient symbols, the stories of Egypt's mighty gods, Ra, the sun god, and Isis, the goddess of magic. The young girl would listen to the priests chanting prayers, their voices echoing like waves through the sacred corridors. She was fascinated by the paintings on the palace walls, the graceful queens, the brave warriors, and the divine pharaohs who ruled with the blessing of the gods. As Nefertiti grew older, her beauty became known throughout the kingdom. Her name, meaning, "the beautiful one has come," seemed to describe her perfectly. But what made her truly remarkable wasn't just her beauty, it was her mind. She asked questions no one else dared to ask. "Why must the gods be so many?" she once whispered to her father. "What if there is only one true light that shines for all?" Her father smiled, sensing that his daughter's thoughts were deeper than most. One day, during a festival at the temple of Ammonius, Nefertiti met Prince Amenhotep, the pharaoh's son. He noticed how she spoke fearlessly to the priests and how her eyes sparkled with curiosity rather than fear. Unlike anyone he had met before, she wasn't impressed by gold or power, she wanted truth and meaning. The prince was fascinated, and soon their friendship began to bloom like a lotus flower on the Nile. What neither of them knew was that their bond would soon change Egypt forever. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the desert sands, Nefertiti stood by the river and looked up at the glowing orange sky. Something in her heart told her that destiny was calling. She didn't yet understand it, but the gods, or perhaps a greater truth, had chosen her for something extraordinary. Years passed, and Nefertiti's friendship with Prince Amenhotep grew into something deeper. The palace at Thebes had become her second home, filled with the scent of lotus flowers and the sound of flutes echoing through its grand halls. Yet behind the beauty of the royal walls, Nefertiti began to see the weight that power carried. The pharaoh's court was full of whispers, nobles arguing over land, priests defending their gods, and soldiers bringing messages from distant borders. Egypt was vast, powerful, but also divided. The people worshipped many gods, and the priests of Ammonius held more power than even the pharaoh himself. Nefertiti, wise beyond her years, listened quietly and learned. Prince Amenhotep was unlike other royals. He was a dreamer, gentle, thoughtful, and fascinated by the heavens. "Nefertiti," he said one evening as they watched the stars over the Nile, "I believe there is only one great sun that gives life to all. Perhaps there is only one true God, a God of light." Nefertiti's eyes widened. His thoughts matched her own secret questions. Together, they shared their dreams of a new Egypt, one guided not by fear of many gods, but by love of truth and unity. The bond between them became unbreakable. When the old pharaoh passed away, Amenhotep became Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, and Nefertiti, now his queen. The coronation ceremony was filled with music and golden light. Crowds cheered as the young couple stood together, their hands raised toward the blazing sun. "May the light of Aten guide us," Amenhotep proclaimed, introducing a name few had heard before, Aten, the sun disk, the life-giver. The priests of Ammonius looked uneasy, but Nefertiti's smile shone with confidence. She felt the winds of change stirring in Egypt's golden sands. As queen, Nefertiti brought warmth and grace to the palace. She greeted the people herself, listened to their needs, and wore simple jewelry when meeting the poor. The people adored her. They said her presence brought peace, and that when she walked by, even the lotus flowers seemed to turn their faces toward her. Yet not everyone was pleased. The priests of Ammonius began to whisper, fearful of losing their power. In secret, they plotted against the queen who dared to question their gods. Late one night, as Nefertiti stood on the palace balcony, the moonlight glimmering on the Nile, she felt both the beauty and the burden of her crown. "Change is never easy," she whispered. "But truth must always shine, like the sun itself." Behind her, Amenhotep placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Together," he said, "we will lead Egypt into a new dawn." And under the glowing stars of Thebes, a new chapter in history quietly began. The sun rose over Egypt with a brilliance unlike any before. Under Pharaoh Amenhotep IV and Queen Nefertiti, the kingdom was changing, slowly, yet unmistakably. The temples of Ammonius grew quiet as new songs filled the air, hymns to Aten, the sun god who gave life to all. For the first time, the people sang not of dozens of gods, but of one light that shone over rich and poor alike. "The Aten rises for everyone," Nefertiti said softly to the children who gathered near her chariot. "He warms the farmer in the field and the queen in her palace, his love is equal for all." Her words were gentle, but powerful. The old priests of Ammonius were furious. Their grand temples grew empty, their offerings untouched. In their anger, they called the new faith dangerous, a rebellion against tradition. But Nefertiti and Amenhotep were not afraid. Together, they decided to build a new capital, a city dedicated to Aten alone, far from the old temples and politics of Thebes. They named it Akhetaten, meaning the horizon of the sun. Nefertiti oversaw the planning herself, wide-open courtyards filled with sunlight, graceful palaces, and gardens lined with papyrus and blooming lotus. The city sparkled like a jewel in the desert, a new beginning for Egypt. In the heart of Akhetaten, the royal family appeared before their people not as distant rulers, but as a family blessed by the sun. Nefertiti and Akhenaten, as the pharaoh was now called, raised their daughters under the open sky, teaching them kindness and wisdom. The people adored their radiant queen. She was often seen walking among them without guards, listening to their stories, giving bread to the hungry, and comforting the sick. To many, Nefertiti was not just a queen, she was the mother of Egypt's new light, but shadows still lingered beyond the city's shining walls. Messengers brought word of unrest, soldiers along the borders grew restless, and nearby kingdoms whispered that Egypt had become weak, too focused on its new god and not enough on its army. Even within the palace, some advisors doubted the path their rulers had chosen. "The gods of old will not forgive this," one warned. Nefertiti listened quietly, her gaze fixed on the setting sun. "The truth," she replied, "is not always welcomed, but it never fades." That evening, as the last light of the sun dipped behind the desert hills, Nefertiti stood atop the palace terrace with her husband. Below them, Akhetaten glowed golden under the fading sky. The queen felt a mix of pride and unease. They had built a city of hope, but she could sense the storm gathering beyond the horizon. Still, she lifted her chin and whispered to the wind, "Let the sun rise again tomorrow. Egypt must see what love and truth can build." The years passed, and the great city of Akhetaten shone like a jewel in the desert, but even jewels can crack. At first, life was peaceful. The songs to Aten echoed across the courtyards each morning, and the royal family seemed blessed by endless sunlight. Yet beneath that brightness, small cracks began to appear. The priests of the old gods had not forgotten their power. In secret, they spread rumors, that the droughts came because Ammonius was angry, that the floods of the Nile had weakened because Egypt had abandoned its true gods. Fear crept back into the hearts of the people like a shadow at sunset. Queen Nefertiti saw the change in her people's eyes, where once there was joy, now there was doubt. The markets grew quiet, and whispers filled the air. To make matters worse, Pharaoh Akhenaten had become more withdrawn, spending long hours in the temple, praying to Aten alone. He began to ignore the advisors who warned of unrest at the borders. When messengers arrived from faraway lands, begging for help against invaders, he simply said, "Aten will protect them." Nefertiti's heart ached. She loved her husband deeply, but she knew that faith without action could not defend a kingdom. One night, Nefertiti climbed the palace steps to speak with Akhenaten. The moonlight bathed the terrace in silver, and the city below shimmered faintly in the dark. "My love," she whispered, "Aten gives us light, but we must guard that light ourselves. The people suffer. They are hungry and afraid." But Akhenaten, his eyes shining with distant devotion, only smiled. "The sun will rise again, Nefertiti. Aten will heal Egypt." She felt a tear slide down her cheek. For the first time, she wondered if his faith had taken him too far from the world they once shared. As the months passed, Nefertiti took charge of what she could. She organized food for the poor, sent orders to strengthen the army, and met with advisors herself. The people began to whisper again, not in fear this time, but in hope. "The queen still listens," they said. "The queen still cares." But her courage angered those who sought to control her. The priests who opposed her grew bolder, spreading lies that Nefertiti wanted to overthrow the pharaoh. Some even claimed she was no longer loyal to Aten. Every day felt like walking a narrow bridge between light and darkness. Then came the tragedy that changed everything. One of Nefertiti's beloved daughters fell ill, a fever that no prayer could cure. For days, the queen sat beside her child's bed, her hands trembling as she prayed beneath the rays of the Aten. But the sun rose and set without mercy, and by the seventh night, the little girl's light faded forever. Nefertiti's cries echoed through the empty halls of the palace. The queen who once embodied strength now knelt in sorrow, her heart shattered. Yet even through her grief, she whispered, "The light must go on. Egypt still needs me." Silence had fallen over Akhetaten. The city that once sang with the hymns of Aten now echoed with the cries of wind over empty courtyards. Many had fled back to Thebes, drawn by the promises of the old priests who claimed that Ammonius had returned. Pharaoh Akhenaten, worn by grief and faith, had grown weaker each passing day, retreating deeper into the shadows of the temple. But Queen Nefertiti stood firm. Her heart still beat with purpose, not for glory or worship, but for the people she loved. She could not allow Egypt's hope to vanish into the sand. Determined, she took the reins of the kingdom. Nefertiti gathered the loyal nobles, commanders, and scholars who still believed in peace and unity. Aten's light was never meant to divide, she told them. It was meant to remind us that all hearts shine beneath the same sun. Her calm strength inspired them. Under her guidance, the city saw brief renewal, food was shared again, the soldiers stood guard, and the temples reopened to honor life itself rather than just power. Even the people who once doubted her began to call her the living spirit of the sun. But destiny, as always, demanded its due. One evening, as the desert sky burned in orange and red, Nefertiti stood on the balcony overlooking the Nile. News had come that her beloved husband, Akhenaten, had died in his sleep. The queen's face remained still, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She felt sorrow, yes, but also peace. His dream of truth and light, though misunderstood, had planted a seed that time would never erase. "We both reached for the sun," she whispered softly, "and though it burned us, it also made us eternal." In the years that followed, Nefertiti's name slowly faded from the official records. Some said she ruled Egypt briefly as pharaoh herself, others claimed she disappeared into the desert, her spirit joining the sun she worshipped. But one thing never vanished, her legend. Centuries later, artists would carve her face in stone, her tall blue crown reaching toward the heavens, her eyes forever calm and proud. Even in silence, she seemed to say, "Beauty and truth outlive every empire." And so, the sun rose once more over the golden sands of Egypt. The city of Akhetaten lay in ruins, its stones kissed by time, yet when the morning light touched them, they glowed faintly, as if whispering her name. Nefertiti, the queen who loved her people, who dreamed of one light for all, remained not in temples or scrolls, but in the hearts of those who believe that kindness and courage never fade, even beneath the endless sun.